Welcome, everyone. This is our second webinar, this time with Suzi Tucker and Peter DeVries. It's January 28th, 2019. We're still welcoming people who will be gathering with us. Really nice to have you all. And my name is Leslie Nips. I am kind of your MC for this coffee clutch, as we sometimes call it in the US. If you want to go get tea or coffee, and just imagine you're gathering at your local coffee house or cafe with Suzi and Peter. Before I introduce them, or actually really invite them to introduce us, I just want to do a little bit of an orientation around Zoom for those of you who are new. In the upper right, and by the way, for those of you who are on a tablet or on a phone, some of what I'm going to describe looks differently, so you're going to have to hunt for it for yourself just a little bit. But if you're on a computer, on a laptop, then in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice a toggle that will either say speaker view or gallery view. That's a way to toggle either seeing everybody on the meeting or to have the speaker be really big, in which case I would be really big right now. And you can set that the way you prefer. Peter and Suzi probably want the gallery view so that they can see everybody, which is nice. But you might want speaker view so that you can see the speakers a bit more prominently when they start to speak. In the bottom left-hand corner, there are a couple of very useful toggles. One is the muting. You're all being brought onto the meeting automatically muted, and we ask you to stay muted just because once meetings get large, the background noise starts to get pretty unworkable. But if we stay small enough, then we might actually be able to have some out loud sharings or questions. And so that's one way to manage your mute. And then right next to it is essentially the same function for the video. Some of you right now have your video muted, or as it says, stop video. And so you can do that if for any reason you don't want people to see what's going on. However, it is nice to see your faces. It's like in Constellations work, there's something about the gathering and the feeling of the whole group. So unless you're doing something truly embarrassing or you haven't showered or whatever, it would be nice to see you all. But that is an option. And then the last thing is in the bottom middle is a chat function. You can just go ahead and click on that. Right now, I invite you all, and my apologies, these options, of course, are not available to people on the phone. Zoom is mostly a visual medium, and so phone people can mostly listen in, and that's the way they're going to be able to participate. But you can click on the chat function, and you can tell us where you're calling from or where you're zooming in from. We would love to see just where people are coming from. And I need to, let's say I need to close my participant screen and I need to open up my chat screen. So yeah, just type in there, where in the world are you zooming in from? It's always nice for Peter and Suzi to get a little bit of a sense. We've got someone from Taos, New Mexico. Oh, and Tucson, Arizona, you guys are close. San Jose, California, another San Francisco Bay Area. Mostly we seem to have folks from the, oh, here's a Canadian. We officially became international. Excellent. South Carolina. And we will continue to welcome people as they join the video, the webinar. It's good to have you all here. With that, that is my welcome to Zoom. And now I want to turn it over to our faculty. Suzi DeVries, excuse me, Peter DeVries and Suzi Tucker. Wow. It'll just become one long name by the end.
Okay.
Awesome. Our 2 out of our 3 faculty for the upcoming West Coast Constellations Intensive in March 8th through 12th, coming up in Santa Cruz, California, USA. And I can't tell you how honored I am to have them both say yes to me, say yes to this opportunity. And it's been a delight getting to know both of them a bit better, and it's an honor to be able to introduce them to you. And so Peter from Mill Valley, right? Mill Valley, California, is that right? Or San Rafael?
No, it's Mill Valley.
Mill Valley,
Yeah.
just north of San Francisco. Would you please introduce yourself to us a little bit? Your background, your lineage, and what's got you interested in constellations these days?
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me to this meeting and also being on the staff. I'm originally from Holland, and I live in the United States since about 30 years. About 20 years ago, I got to experience my first constellation, and that experience was strong and still is with me, and something changed in me, something awakened in me, and that propelled me to want to experience more of constellation work. I went to many workshops, I went to many trainings, I went to many of the senior teachers of this work, and I started on a journey, and I'm still on that journey. And what really fascinated me a lot in constellation work is the representative perception, because that really took me by surprise. How is this possible? How can we, in a very short time, embody, feel, sense, intuitively know what sometimes is very hard to know, and especially the undercurrents, what's underneath of our stories, what's invisible, what's not told, what's not seen, and how that can come to the surface and be known and be felt and embodied. So I got very much taken by that, and it has been a little bit my exploration, my favorite way to explore what that is. And so that's also how I came to create something like representative perception that's done with movement, and that even gives more information about what's invisible and more about what our potential is.
And I'm going to do follow-up questions on that, because I'm very interested about what Peter's been up to in this regard. But before we do that, I want to ask, who were some of your main teachers? Did you work with Bert Hellinger? I know that Gabriella Borkin was very much in the North Bay in those years, so I'm just curious about that a little bit.
Yeah, Gabrielle Borkin, she used to live also in Mill Valley, and we had quite a bit of an exchange back and forth where we would practice with each other.
Oh, that's nice.
That's also where we started to actually explore single representation, because we saw Bert Hellinger at times just have one representative and stay with that a little longer before actually having a constellation unfold. And we thought, well, what happens when you stay with a representation for a longer time? Is there a complexity to it? Is there more information that can be felt? And I did that with Gabrielle quite a bit. I've been trained officially by Victoria Snaith-Schnabel in Portland, one of the first trainings in the United States. When Bert Hellinger would come to the United States, I would follow him here quite a bit. Also Hunter Bowman, he would come here. Sometimes they would come together. Albeck Marr, Gunther Weber. In those days, this is where I would go and visit and learn and be in constellations. I would be a lot in constellations.
Lovely.
So some of you might already see me in the older videos of Bert Hellinger, where I represent, and when he would ask for a volunteer, my hand would go up first mostly, and so I dove in pretty strong, and I was really totally fascinated with the whole process. So that's what happened.
Lovely, and just to go on the record for everybody, Peter does trainings here in Northern California and is I believe the longest standing trainer who's been continuously doing trainings here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Yeah. There are now several, but Peter's been doing it longest.
And my specialization has really become how to use it in individual sessions. And because when we started in group work, there were very little there was very little application in individual session. And I have done that quite a bit, and I see quite a bit of clients where I work remotely or by Zoom, where I do individual work.
Lovely, thank you. And let me turn this over to Suzi in Long Island, right? No.
Connecticut.
Oh, Connecticut, right, Connecticut.
I work a lot on Long Island and
right.
in Manhattan. Well, let's see. I was in publishing, psychology publishing for 30 years when Bert's manuscript for Love's Hidden Symmetry came across my desk. And unlike Peter, when I actually got to workshops, my hand never went up. And I sort of received what I would describe as kind of an accidental, I think actually Jane Peterson used this phrase, an accidental education in this work, because really I connected with Bert through language. I really connected with him through the mind, through the observations he was bringing, the sort of what I consider a philosophical as opposed to, or encompassing a therapeutic lens, but really a philosophical lens. And actually met Gabrielle and Harold and Hunter and Bert sort of at the same time. I guess they all came from the West and they came East, and eventually started organizing for Bert. Actually, when I think about it, did, probably 7, 8 trainings. I don't really use the word training, but trainings with Harold Honan, who many, many years ago was sort of Bert's protege around the same time as Hunter. And, it was the most organic experience I ever had in my life, because I just found myself continuing to show up and continuing to participate, and I think similar to Peter, felt something sort of opening. For me, it was not so much a bonk on the head. It was slow, and it felt very trustworthy. And my life sort of began to change because I began to change in my life. Eventually, Harold left the United States. He had seeded courses in New York, Florida, Santa Barbara, and Washington, D.C. People are still working, I'm happy to say. That was 20 years ago. And Harold left, and when he left, we were looking at New York and talking about, of the 150 students who had come through what we had created, who would be the person to kind of take over New York. And at a certain point, he looked at me and he said, well, of course you. And my first reaction was like, oh, no, not me. At which point he got just a tad angry. Because basically he said, I'm offering a gift and you're saying, oh, I don't really want that gift. It was such a great kick in the butt for me. And I've been teaching and facilitating ever since. So I'm just about to start in February a new guided learning. I think it's my 18th one.
Wow. Yeah.
So I just want to say really quickly, the other track that I have followed, and I really do connect this with this kind of opening too, is I always called myself a writer and carried a lot of blank notebooks. And I write constantly now. And for me, when you think of one's interest, for me, creativity and constellations are the same word, on different words for the same thing.
Lovely. Wow. I'm so awestruck. All the history that's right here on this call right now. It's kind of,
and Peter and I met a very long time ago in some southern place. I don't remember where we were.
At the conference in North Carolina.
I remember a picnic bunch.
Yeah, that was nice.
That's great. That's awesome. So let me pick up from that. Part of what is going to happen at the intensive is all the faculty, including Sarah Payton, who is not with us today, she was at the last one, will be offering short workshops. And so I'm going to just continue with Suzi for now. And you're offering two, as everyone is. One is called The Couple's Journey. But the other one is called, which is going to be fascinating for anyone who's in a couple or wanting to work with couples or looking to be in a couple but isn't, et cetera, et cetera. But the other one's really, I'm very intrigued about, which is When Healing Threatens Equilibrium. And I'm wondering, would you be willing to say a few words about that and why that's an interesting question for you, Suzi, and what you hope is going to come out of the workshop for people?
Yeah, it has a couple of different meanings, one of which you sort of brought up last time. So I'm not going to go back to that right now, but I've been thinking about it. For me, one of the questions about people finding a different way in the world, a way that actually is more full of different kinds of potential, something different from replication, is right at the threshold. They become very frightened. And they become very frightened, and myself included, become very frightened for good reason. So that was kind of the first thing I started thinking about is they're right. They're absolutely right. Because moving toward growth and well-being can end a marriage, can mean that this job is no longer the right job, can mean all sorts of things that we've become accustomed to. And so I think that we all rush, or many of us rush toward the threshold, and when we get there, we tiptoe back and close the door again, because things are going to be just growth causes some instability, and we're not sure we can get back on the track.
Mm-hmm. And what are you hoping in this workshop are people going to figure out a way through that, or a way to work with that with clients?
Both. I started developing something about 2 years ago called Threshold Constellations.
Oh.
And so they really sort of work right at that place between the then and the next, right? So I will work with people actually doing them, and also teaching that, because I think actually as a facilitator, it's interesting, Peter's been the longest standing person in Mill Valley, which is such a beautiful thing. And I've been in it a long time too. And I think at various places I might have stopped, because it can be discouraging when people turn back. It really can be discouraging. Yeah. So for me, this is very much about facilitators as well, to kind of let them have a way to both let that be a part of people's pacing, a part of attunement. If we are going to be attuned to people, we have to be attuned to that too. So I see it in both directions, and I guess it'll depend on which cohort comes to the workshop.
Yeah. But I love that. I mean, one of the presuppositions of Constellations work is that as long as it's a system, and a system is just more than one, anything that's more than one, we can constellate it. And so if the threshold is proving to have some interesting challenges involved with it, then by all means, let's constellate it. Right. And I love the idea that you've actually just decided, let's go ahead and focus in on this and see what's smart about stopping or being afraid or...
Right. I've kind of fallen in love with where people stop, right? Because that's part of my agreement in a sense, right?
Yeah. Oh, I'm just part of the dilemma of coming to the intensive. I just want to warn you all, if you're coming, it's a bit part of the suffering of the intensive is choosing which workshops to go to because they're scheduled against each other. And as the organizer, I'm not on the faculty this year. I myself am also going to have this dilemma, but I'm very excited by this one. Thank you, Suzi. And Peter, you are also offering up a couple of really juicy workshops. One of them is Core Intention Constellations, and the other one is titled A Short Walk to Freedom. And that's the one I wanted to ask about. Is that the one where you're going to share a little bit more about this sort of single person representation you were talking about? And can you share a bit more about that approach to doing constellations?
Yeah, so it happened probably around 5 years ago, where in a workshop somebody asked me, "Oh, what about representing the true self? What about representing the essential self or the organic self, whoever you want to call it?" But in that workshop, it was, can that be represented? And of course, I was going like, "Oh, let's see what happens." And I represented that, and in this particular representation, I use movement, and the movement is walking. So we added somehow a dynamic dimension to representation. And in that representation, I felt my whole perception was changing. I felt almost going into an altered state where I had clearer perception of the environment. I felt more energy. I felt more expanded, which sometimes can happen in a regular constellation. When you represent, let's say, a newborn child, you might have the same sensations, the same felt sense. And that started for me this whole exploration, like, oh, can we pioneer deeper into representative perception? What else is possible? And that's also where I started to represent beings, like enlightened beings, awakened beings, that have a much more expanded form of clarity, of knowledge, of presence. And then, of course, I started to experience that is also what can happen in me. Within me, long story short, within me, I can experience the felt sense of what it is to be existence. I can say, all within me, I have the capability to sense into and feel into what existence is, and all aspects of existence, of human experience, but also experience out of nature. I can represent an animal, I can represent a mountain, I can represent a tree, I can represent a rock, I can represent a river. And so there's an infinite amount of possibilities that can be sensed in representing. And so in this particular workshop, like a short walk to freedom, it's about that we can experience a sense of freedom within ourselves within 4 or 5 minutes. So some people in spiritual practice, they sit in long meditations, they go to meditation retreats, and at some point they will have an experience of expansion, of freedom. And I'm saying this can happen within 5 minutes. And so this is the potential that's there, and I'm still exploring that, and I'm still practicing that. It's become in a way, in a meditation for me to practice this on a daily basis.
Wow. I don't know if you remember, Peter, but I was in your workshop at the 2015 conference in San Diego.
Yeah.
And I ended up being the representative in your client's constellation. And I don't know about other facilitators here in this webinar, but I know one of the challenges sometimes of facilitating, and maybe this is the coming together of Suzi's workshop and your workshop, like threshold bit and then the sort of the larger scale together. But sometimes people get into roles, and then inviting them into the next healing movement, there can be resistance to it. Understandably, as Suzi has reminded us. And what I found when I was representing was that this walking thing that I was doing was that I was able to step into the fullness of the problem, the obstacle, the upset, the difficulty, and then the transition, and then into the resolution, all in one, just exactly. One representation. It was quite magical. It was kind of wonderful. And very excited about seeing what other applications there might be for this kind of additional way of making use of the field.
Yeah, exactly. And also what Suzi said, you know, that there is thresholds, there is barriers that show up, there is blockages that show up. But the thing is that, so within 5 minutes, we can have a really deep experience of what it is that is the core of us, you know, the sun that shines in us at all times. And the core experience of essence that's in us, we can feel and sense that. And that, in a way, becomes a magnet that starts to awaken in our body. It starts to awaken in our nervous system. And it becomes, in a way, a magnet. It starts to become infectious. And it also means that when we get to thresholds, when we get to barriers, we know where we can go. It's
a reference,
We have a reference. We go like, oh, that is me. That is what is actually deeper inside of me. Yes, there is a blockage. And yes, I can feel the blockage too. As you said, I can walk the blockage. I can go what I call, I can go into a rabbit hole. Because I'm walking, let's say, the essential self, but then there is judgment. Or there's a core belief, you know, I can't do this, I'm not good enough. And then I can embody that, I can feel that, I can be present with that, and then it shifts back into the essential self. And so I go back and forth. And so what happens over time when we do this, that basically constellation work can become very concentrated in one movement where things starts to release and unblend in a very fast way. And also we start to get deep insight about what the undercurrents are, what are the hidden stories, what is not been seen, and that actually comes to the surface.
Lovely. I look forward to seeing more of that in action as well. And
in action and felt, because this is all about the felt sense. This is all about feeling, and it's a combination of feeling and intuition.
And in the meantime, given what you just said, I'd like to continue with you, Peter. Do you have an exercise or a meditation or something that you can walk the group through for a few minutes here?
Yeah, so this is more, what I had in mind is more a classical guided meditation that we do in constellation work. So let's do that. So for everybody, just take a moment just to close your eyes and be with your breath. Just allow yourself to follow the breath. Just sense the body sitting on a chair, contact with the chair. Possibly you have your feet on the ground, connection to the earth. Again, just noticing the breath, the in-breath, the out-breath. Allowing the breath to connect into the belly. And sensing that this body is alive, and there is a aliveness in this body. The heart is beating, there's breath. Perhaps you can feel the heartbeat in the body, in the chest, in the pulse. Just sensing the aliveness of the body right now in this moment. Now imagine that you're sitting in a room like this and that your parents walk into the room, your father, your mother. What happens to the felt sense of aliveness in your body? Does it expand? Is it comfortable? Uncomfortable? Is there contraction? What happens to the aliveness in the body when your mother stands in front of you, your father stands in front of you? What happens to the body? What happens to the energy, the felt sense? What happens to the breath? Now imagine that your parents stand behind you, your father on the right side, your mother on the left side behind you. What does it feel like that the parents stand behind you? Do you feel supported? Do you feel you can relax into your parents? They are present, they're there for you. Or do you feel cautious? Do you feel perhaps not trusting? Perhaps it's good with your father and not so good with your mother. What happens when they stand behind you? How do you breathe? What happens with the aliveness in the body when your parents stand behind you? Now imagine that behind your father's stand, there's his parents, and behind your mother, there are her parents. Your grandparents are there behind you. What happens then to the body? What does it feel like? And behind the grandparents are their parents, and the ancestors are behind them. And it goes on and on and on, back many, 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 many generations to the source of life, mysterious place, the source of life. So feeling this all behind you, your parents, your grandparents, ancestors, the source of life. What does it feel like to have this behind you? What happens to the body? What happens to the sense of aliveness? You might even ask, where does this aliveness come from? What's the root? Where did it start? How life is given from generation to generation, to your parents, to you. And again, imagine your parents standing in front of you, and this time they have a gift for you. Perhaps from them both, or each one of them has a special gift for you. Just allowing yourself to be receptive and to receive. What's the gift that you are getting from your parents? What happens when you receive that gift? What happens to the body? And imagine your parents now leaving the room, and you are left by yourself for a moment. What does it feel like if your parents leave? How do you feel? What happens when they leave? Is it comfortable, uncomfortable? Just noticing. And again, imagine the ancestors behind you, the system that you come from, the family system that you come from behind you. And imagine that your death is standing in front of you. Again, the system that you come from, and death standing in front of you. What happens to the aliveness that you have in the body? What is incomplete? What is unfinished? What is unexpressed? Which stories have not been told? What wants to complete inside of you, if you let it? And this is the invitation. What happens if you let that happen? What if you let that, what needs to be completed and needs to be expressed and needs to be told, what if that can happen right now? What would that feel like? What would that feel like in the body? So in a moment, I'm going to count back from 3 to 1. When I reach 1, you can allow your eyes to open and you can move your body. Just allowing this experience to unfold within you. Starting to count 3, 2, taking a deep breath inside the belly, and 1, allowing your eyes to open when you're ready. Yeah, so
Thank you, Peter.
yeah, you're welcome.
That was sweet. I'm wondering, before we do a little thing with Suzi as well, does anyone have a share or a question? Or even sometimes when we do these kinds of guided meditations, things, the person doing the talking doesn't know what's going on inside your head. If there's anything snaggy that you want to ask Peter about. But a share or a question. And the way to let me know is you can raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself, or you can type into the chat. You want to have a share? Or, I mean, I can share something, but I don't want to take up all the time. Great, Tatiana. Excellent. I just unmuted you.
Hello.
Hello.
It was an amazing experience. Thank you, Peter.
You're welcome.
When I imagine that when you said, imagine your parents walk in, I kind of, like split second, I felt like, oh no, it will be disaster. But then it felt very calm. So because before they left, they divorced, so it's why I felt this way. But when they came, it was surprisingly calm, and they they're very respectful to each other, and they didn't fight over me or didn't want feel like some of them were important. And then when they behind me, feels very good. And again, I'm kind of surprised, it's very calm and nice, and they supportive. And when gifts, my mother, so both of them have gifts in their hands. So that my father didn't want me open it. It felt like he wanted me discover it. So it's kind of very, thank you. It was very.
Yeah, there in this guided meditation, there's many things that can be touched into and felt, and I've also found it interesting to do it a few times and see how it is, because each time it could be a little bit different, also depending on what your state is in. If you're activated, triggered, let's say you're unhappy, likely be different the way your parents show up. And so it's something that you can revisit once in a while. And I think especially if we have triggers and we don't feel fully happy with ourselves, it's actually good to do this exercise and see what happens.
Thank you, Tatiana. That's really lovely. Appreciate you sharing. And at this point, I'm gonna turn it over to Suzi, who's going to walk us through something as well.
Well, as usual, I'm going to read to you. I want to say that I'm in a good state to do it, Peter, because I felt very spacious, I guess is the word I would use. And very, also a little surprised in a different way from Tatiana that my mother and my father gave me very specific gifts, which was interesting to me. I sort of hadn't, it makes sense, but my mind hadn't allowed that to make sense to me. So it was interesting. So I'm going to read to you, I began by saying that I used to call myself a writer, but I actually had a lot of empty notebooks. And, writing to me is very similar to Constellations in the sense that I don't know what I'm going to write until the words are on the page, and then they tell me something I don't know that I knew before I wrote them. So, I wrote this for this occasion and sat down with blank paper this morning. So you can listen, you can close your eyes, you can do whatever. Just taking a simple moment, letting it stand out from other moments for a moment. We can close our eyes if that feels right, or perhaps we keep them open. Sit back, sit forward, let our limbs rest in whatever position feels right. You can listen to my voice or let it be in the distance. We come as we are, each one of us. And I don't know what has occurred before this moment for others, how the day arrived, what happened this week or even month. But there is a place beside you where you may decide to lay down those things for a moment. The stress or busyness, obligations, burdens, confusions. You will not wander far, and I thank you for your companionship in this moment. This morning I woke up, not only from sleep. I sat back and closed my eyes, moving past the clang and the clutter of anxiety, sadness, excitement, expectation, all that swirls around me. In the stillness, I could hear into that part of me that is grounded, full, in relationship. From there, I could remember something of my childhood, my mother and me and her odd band of friends. I remembered her cooking in those tiny Brooklyn kitchens, turning out enough food for a dozen people. I remember friends of every conceivable background and foreground. They were caring, passionate, brilliant, flawed. They're all dead now. Old age, heart conditions, AIDS, eventually dying of life. I miss them, and I think of them this morning. My husband, too, is gone. 10 years this year. I miss him, and I think of him this morning. All of these memories mix in with the present. I am so fortunate to have friends from every part of my life and to be in inspirational exchange with so many students who are my teachers. I think of them this morning. And I look at our son and witness to his struggles and to his beautiful emergence. I think of Cole this morning. This morning I pause to take a long, deep breath to remember, and another to go on. I take in this day, another chance. I am grateful to be among. For me, this morning is already a love letter to the world, written in golden fineness and charcoal blunder. To those whom I have had the good fortune to stumble into along the way, I am so deeply grateful. And to those whom I will meet somewhere down the road, I'm grateful already for your presence, exactly as you are. So thank you for listening.
Hmm.
Wow.
Very nice. Thank you.
I mean, it's almost like you two collaborated. Those two pieces just go really well with each other. Does anyone have a share or an appreciation or a question for Suzi or for Peter as well, but just in response to those little experiences you just had? Again, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself and start to talk. Tatiana again is going to raise her hand. Thank you.
Yay, Tatiana.
I try to be humble, but anyway, as usual, Suzi, it's so amazing. In a short time, it's just like I'm trying to catch everything, and it's just you said I wake up not from sleep. This is amazing. It's how I feel many times. It's just like, wow, wake up, and now you say not from sleeping. Yes. And then it struck me when you said, you talk about your husband, but then about somebody else. But then you said, I think about our son. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I should think of not my son, but our son. I should remember my ex-husband, his father. I should, it's just shaking me very, So thank you very much, Suzi.
You do catch everything.
Thank you, Tatiana. That's lovely. I just want to share. Miraf, you have your hand up. Yes, I'm going to unmute you. Go for it.
I just hi. I'm from Israel. Yeah, hello. It was really lovely. I feel from the two pieces mainly inclusivity. That's what you said. Yeah, inclusivity that is so missing everywhere, actually. Yeah.
And our other Tatiana said, both experiences are so profound. I am deeply touched, she wrote on the chat. And she doesn't have a microphone. So she wrote, that works, Tatiana. And I just want to say, I've heard versions of Peter's meditations, eliciting the ancestors, but I've never heard anyone specifically say, imagine your parents walk into the room, which is a little different than imagine the presences or something like that, something more energetic or what we might think about eliciting the field. So I literally, I saw my mother and my father enter this apartment where they never could have entered because they died 30 years ago. And I had as complicated a relationship with my parents as anybody else. And I was so touched to see them again. Because I hadn't seen, it's different than when you see them in a constellation. To imagine actually walking into the room. And I thought, oh, it's so good to see you again. So thank you, Peter, for that. And that really connects with Suzi's specific elicitation of all the specific people we've been touched by in our lives. So it just deepened the same sense of, I had some very particular people who were my parents. They're not just energies or something. So Phyllis says to everyone, I felt an expansion in the presence of my parents in the meditation. Yeah, as I sort of did. And in listening to Suzi's reading, I feel a further expansion into my life right now with gratitude for all who have come before me and all who are still here.
Wow.
It's this wonderful marriage of kind of the universal and the specific in particular. So I really, really want to thank Suzi and Peter both for eliciting that. I'm going to take over for just a moment here because I want to share a little bit about the intensive. And then if we have a little bit more time, we'll ask a few more questions. But I'm actually going to grab your screens for those of you who have screens and just share some details about what's coming up. The West Coast Systemic Constellations Intensive, March 8th through 12th. Save $200 through Thursday. For those of you, I know there's some of you on this call who are already enrolled, which is great. Can't wait to see you in March. But some of you are not, maybe on the fence, maybe thinking about it. So this is a really good time to finish thinking about it. So you can save a little bit before Thursday. We do have rooms. The rooms are starting to get taken though. So this is another good reason to reach out to me with any questions. You see my email here, leslie@conviviumconstellations.com, or just go to the website, westcoastconstellations.com, and go ahead and find out more and register. I also just want to share a little bit about the event itself. For those of you who are curious, this is what I'm looking for. And then, come on. Sometimes I have a hard time finding stuff. Here we go. So here is the West Coast Constellations Intensive website. There's a nice picture from the event. We're going to be somewhere else this time. But there are two things that we mostly do at this intensive. One is we gather in cohort circles. For those of you who are like, I've been to workshops, I've been to conferences, what's an intensive? The intensives are especially focused on peer experience, learning, and healing together. And so we gather in smaller groups. There's the large group that gather, but then we gather in smaller peer level groups to do constellations work. We work with all the faculty at different times, but you stay with your cohort to basically develop a kind of a wonderful, tender, adventurous, playful experience of intimate community. And the nice thing is if you're real new to constellations, you're mostly working with people who are at your level. And if you're quite advanced, you'll be mostly working with people at your level, which means that you can kind of dive deep at your level. And then there are the workshops, as I mentioned already. We talked a little bit about Peter's and Suzi's, and these are all listed on the website, including Sarah Payton's. There she is writing on a flip chart. And that's the other way we spend our time together, as well as walks in a beautiful place. And it's gorgeous outside of Santa Cruz. And if you're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to go all the way to Northern California, then think about whales and otters and vineyards. And there's all kinds of reasons to visit Northern California, particularly that region is very, very beautiful, and very beautiful in March. It's all green, and it's just delightful to come. So we hope you consider coming. And before we sign off, any last questions or comments or shares, anything you'd like to say to Suzi or Peter before we sign off? Yes, Tatiana. She speaks on behalf of all, I'm sure. She has the question you all have.
I'm so lucky today I can, speak. But I'm not so lucky in a way because I'm not going to participate, because instead of Santa Cruz, I'm going to Veracruz.
Veracruz, there you go, okay.
So I had a very, hard choice to make.
Mm-hmm.
So, and my question is it going to be every year?
This is an annual event in Northern California, yes. We don't have dates or place for next year yet. I am working on that assiduously right now, but similar time of the year, somewhere near the San Francisco Bay Area.
And when I hear all these nice things, it's like teaser for me. I'm like,
yeah.
oh my God, where am I going to go? Stop saying.
Yes, and this is a good time, to be signed up with our newsletter. And if this year doesn't work, some people need to schedule ahead of time, and we'll get those dates out as soon as we can. And which faculty will be leading it up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Suzi and Peter, any last goodbyes to the group? Oh, we have a few things here in front of me. Julia Kirby wants to say, the idea of death standing in front of me, I really liked Peter. Thank you, she says. That was a strong experience for me as well. And then the other Tatiana says, Mount Madonna is an amazing, very spiritual place. I'm looking forward to see both Peter and Suzi soon. For those of you who know and like Ram Dass, he's one of my special people in my life. It's the home of his guru, which I only just found out. So this is something that actually recommends it to me, because I find Ram Dass a very grounding person. Peter or Suzi, before we go, any last things you'd like to share with the group?
I'm just very grateful that I can be part of the staff and be part of this experience. And so I'm really looking forward to it. It really feels like energetically and feeling wise, it's going to be a great thing. So I'm excited.
Me too.
And I just wanted to add that, what people pointed out about Peter's offering and my offering sort of dovetailing with one another. My experience is that that can happen in particularly in the intensives, that people's work, not better, not worse, not separate, but that I think you mentioned the idea of inclusivity, right? That what a beautiful experience for people to actually take the best from each of us and feel the confluence of the work rather than the separation of people's voices. So I really look forward to that. And I really felt it today. So that was really like, oh, can't wait to go.
And the nice thing about that is sometimes when something is ready to come in, but it doesn't come in one way, it comes in through the voice of another person.
That's right. Right.
It finally the right voice, and we go, oh, I finally heard it.
That's right.
And it can land.
That's right.
So yeah. Okay. Well, thank you everyone else for coming. We'll send you the recording, and have a beautiful day or night wherever you are in the world.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Leslie.
Bye-bye.
Bye.